Hello, friends. I am popping into the group today. I'm just hoping that my volume is working. I am popping in the group today because I wanted to share something with you that's been on my mind on the podcast this week, which I shared on my Facebook page, and you can also find on your favorite podcast player. A Very Full Plate is the name of the podcast. I talked with Kim Ludeman, who was our expert interview last week, around feeling more confident. And one of the things that has been coming up for me, and I know it's been coming up for you guys too, because you've been asking questions, is how do we know if the food that we're eating is actually healthy? How do we know if we're making the best choices for our family? And so I really wanted to bring these two concepts together, feeling confident and making healthy choices, and bringing them together, especially for those of us busy parents who are kind of on the fly, trying to make things work for our family, to make the right choices, but we don't have a lot of time and energy to put into doing all of the research. So one, I hope you know that I am here from kind of like a research perspective. I've been doing lots of reading and searching and all kinds of things to help distill more information down to you. And I want to do an even better job of that. So this is me committing to you to kind of like be your eyes and ears for what is coming up and what is coming out around how to know what's healthy, and to use that information to build healthy meal plans that I feel like meet those standards. So you will notice that you've been seeing a lot of whole grains and a lot of vegetables, and we'll be talking more about that as we go along. But all of that is part of the distillation work that I do in reading and paying attention to that information. But I want to give you 4 ways that you can get more confident in making healthy choices for yourself and for your family in the face of all of this information that exists. So that's what I'm going to talk about here today. I'll provide some notes and links and comments down below. But if you are watching this either live or on the replay, I would love for you to comment and just let me know that you're here, and if you have any questions so that I can get those answered for you. And then I will also share a write-up of this. I'm writing it up as a blog post that will go like live more broadly on Thursday, and I'll share that with you guys so that you can reference it in case watching this whole video isn't for you. So 4 ways that you can get more confident in making healthy choices. The first way that you can get more confident in making healthy choices is to get super clear on your why. So one of the things that came up in this conversation that I had with Kim on the podcast is just that so often we are guided by a list of shoulds or stories that we tell ourselves about why things are the way that they are. And then we say things to ourselves like, I should really lose weight, or I need to exercise more. And those things aren't based in a super clear why for us. Things like, I want to exercise more because it would help me play with my kids more readily. I could get up and down from the floor more easily. Or I want to lose weight because I want to feel really good in my body when I show up to go on dates with my husband. And I think that by taking care of myself, I would feel better. So you notice that like it's less about the weight itself and more about the end result. And getting clear on that end result is going to guide every decision you make around health choices for you and your family. So when we were working with my dad, who was sick with brain cancer, healthy choices looked very different for him than they had ever looked for us in our lives. Meaning, there's a lot of research that says that a keto diet can help with things like seizures and stalling brain cancer in its tracks. And so as a family, we worked really hard to make sure that he had keto options available, and that we were kind of like up on the research of what that looked like, and he stuck to this keto diet, right? That is not something that I recommend for the more broad population, because for most of us, we are not dealing with seizures and brain cancer and all of those things. And so our diet will look really different. So the why is the key factor to deciding what is healthy for you. This is one of those things that like no one else can do the work for you. So one of the things that you did when you came into this group was write down for yourself, like, what are the most important things and how do you want your family to eat? And all of those really go into this why. So getting clear on what's important to you, not what someone else tells you should be important to you. The second thing that you're going to do is be really selective about the information that you take in. I am not perfect at this. And if you go on Instagram or Facebook or the internet at large, you will get bombarded with all of the different ways and types of information and studies that tell you to do one thing and not do another thing. And I completely understand that that can be super overwhelming, that it can feel like information overload, and that you end up not knowing what to do when you have so much information given to you. So here's what I recommend. I recommend that you be really selective about the information that you trust when you see it. So similarly to like when you're asking yourself why, like why do I want to lose weight? Why do I want my family to eat healthy? And that will dictate what it looks like for you. Similarly, being selective with your information, you want to dig down by just continuing to ask why. So recently a study came out, or a quote came out, and it was picked up in a lot of places that said coconut oil is super unhealthy for you. And so I naturally asked myself this question of, well, why? And looking at the information, what I saw is it might be true that coconut oil is not the healthiest fat for you, but there was very little data. It was actually like this researcher just saying, I feel like this, and I didn't see the data to back it up. And if anyone has this data and wants to share it with me, please let me know. I didn't see the data to back it up. So it became this like sensationalist soundbite story because all of us have decided that coconut oil is the healthiest fat. Now, this is where I want to give pause and just give my 2 cents. Most of the things that you hear of as superfoods are probably not as fantastic as someone is making them up to you, making them out to be, or making them sound to you. And I would really think about where the information is coming from. So if it's someone selling you milk and they're telling you how good milk is for you, or it's someone selling coconut oil and they're telling you how good coconut oil is, or they're a paleo devotee and that group as a whole has decided that coconut oil is the best thing for you, I would just really question it. And I've always felt uncomfortable when people are like eating coconut oil and, you know, taking in more coconut oil because it's of its medium chain triglycerides. Like, listen, it is still fat. It is still processed to get the way that it is. And it should be treated like all of the other things, which is asking yourself the questions like, how processed is this? Is there a less processed option available? And how can I, if it is a processed thing, how can I use it for what it is, but not like overuse it? And I think we are really like apt as a society in terms of like sound bites, and all of us are guilty of this. So I'm not blaming anyone in particular, but because we live in sort of like information overload and relying on sound bites and all of these things to really like grasp onto something and then hold on really tight. And so I saw this with agave nectar, which then had a downfall because people were like, oh, it's low glycemic. And then they were like, oh no, it's high fructose. And it's like, this is why the pendulum swings from things being so good to so bad, because we are not being discerning in the information we take in and really asking those deep questions of why. Now, here's the thing. It's not your job to have to ask why about everything. So I'm not suggesting that you research like every single product that comes into your house. What I would suggest instead is where you feel like something is the magical answer, that you would dig down and why. And for other things, you would rely on good common sense. Things like whole, real, unprocessed is where I start with everything. Is this whole? Is this real? Is this unprocessed? Cool. Then I'm going to like trust that it's pretty darn good as I'm going to get without making everything from scratch myself, and move on. Right? Okay. So that brings us to tip number 3, which is become a detective in what works for you. So this is the other piece of the puzzle, is that I see folks who are looking for someone to have the answers for them. Meaning, well, is gluten good or bad? I don't know. How does it make you feel? Is dairy good or bad? I don't know. How does it make you feel? And so often, and I faced this when I was dealing with my personal health struggles, and I've shared some of those here, but I'll share in a little bit more detail, is like I was having severe stomach pains, and I went to my doctor and said, I am having severe stomach pains. I cannot move from bed after work each day. This is a problem. Something is wrong. And I think it might be dairy that's causing it. And she said, well, does yogurt hurt your stomach? And I said, yeah, sometimes my stomach hurts after I eat yogurt. And she said, well, then it's not a dairy problem because you should be able to tolerate yogurt. And I didn't know a lot about food at the time. And so I sort of just like accepted that as like, well, I guess it's not dairy that's a problem. But the real answer is like, maybe that's true. Maybe it's true that like the lactose is less in yogurt and I should have been able to digest it. But the reality is that also maybe I was very sensitive to dairy, and to like pass off someone's instinct about themselves and not ask them to dig deeper. Like, I don't wish that she gave me an answer because she actually didn't have one. But what I would have loved to seen, and what I have worked with people on since, just even as a supportive friend, is to say, if you think that might be the case, let's look at the lowest common denominator. Let's take a look at the most obvious things like gluten and dairy and corn and soy, like these major allergens, and say, if your stomach hurts after you try this thing, why don't you try taking it out of your diet for a while, see how you feel, and if you feel better, then like there's your answer, right? If you don't need a magical test or any of these kinds of things, especially where we're talking about intolerances and not allergies, to figure out what works for your body. And this works on all the levels, right? Is like if you are feeling really, if you can't sleep, let's use another example. If you can't sleep and drink coffee at 3 in the afternoon, the first thing I would tell you to do is to treat your body like a science experiment. Stop drinking coffee at 3 in the afternoon. Maybe stop drinking coffee altogether, but certainly stop drinking it in the later day. See what happens, right? There's no magical answer here. And even data on like hundreds of thousands of people studies is not going to let you know what works for you. So you need to first get clear on your why. Like, why do I want to be healthy? What does it even mean to be healthy? Because that's going to inform every choice. Then you want to be selective in the information you're listening to and what you're trusting, especially where someone claims to have a magical best answer or maybe a magical worst answer. And then number 3 would be become a detective in what works for you or your family. In the case where we're talking about kids, let's think about like how we can sort of experiment on our kids, especially where it is low impact things or just like a small thing that you could help to address. And then number 4 would be to focus on your highest impact choices. So I've been thinking a lot about this practice of like, how do I spend the least effort and get the most impact? And so what that looks like in our house is not nitpicking what kind of candy our kids have and saying like, we can only have candy that is naturally sweetened, because my kids at most are only having 1 piece of candy per day, because that's like a practice we've created as a family. Instead, I would look at, they've been really into eggs lately. So instead, if I can hack their egg consumption, if I can make those eggs healthier by buying, in my case, I buy pasture-raised eggs, so that I know that these were like animals that ate like that were naturally fed things and were on pasture. If I can do that, then I have boosted their nutrition without like worrying all the other things. Here's another example, is like if your kids are eating white bread and they eat sandwiches at school every day, what kind of impact or difference would it make if you were to switch that for a more nutritious whole grain bread, right? Can you see what I mean? Like, it's a simple change. It doesn't require more work on your part. It just requires creating the habit and buying something differently, changing your buying patterns, and it has a high impact as a result of that. So that is where I would focus your choices. And where people start getting into these nitpicky things, then you get to be the person who kind of lets it go, because you've done the work, you understand where you're at with your family, you understand your end goal, and you are not getting caught up in these ever-changing food trends, which is what I try to really combat. Is like, this is whole, real food. It's always going to be good for you. If it's not good for you, here are some changes you can make to make it work better for your individual body, and then we can like let go of all the noise. So here are my 4 tips, and then I want to tell you one thing in the news, and I'll give you a link to it. So the first thing you're going to do to be more confident in your choices is to get really clear on your why. Second, you're going to be selective in the information that you take in and that you trust when it comes to guidelines around healthy eating. Number 3, you're going to become a detective in what works for you, because no one besides your own body, and by you doing the work, can you find out what actually works for your individuality. And then number 4 would be to focus on the highest impact choices. So things that you eat all the time are the first thing that you switch out. Things that you eat less of the time or are like less concerning are the last things you switch out. I have a story that I always think back to when I was at Whole Foods and I was working with folks, and this woman came to me and she said, I'm really worried about agave nectar, back to that agave example, because it had been touted as this like super healthy sweetener, and then there was some data coming out that it was very high in fructose and it was perhaps not as potentially as healthy as we thought. I said, I can see how that's concerning if you thought that this was a magical answer. Tell me more about what you're eating all the time. And she said, oh, well, I'm actually, I had Kentucky Fried Chicken for a snack today. And I was like, whoa, 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 like record screech, or like full stop, because you are not at a point where you should be even concerned about agave here. and I see this so often, is like it's really easy to get nitpicky, but you need to focus on like your highest impact things first, which is getting out the junk in particular that you eat all the time, and then working your way down there to the more minutia, because focusing on every little detail is a recipe for overwhelm, for disaster, and for not making any progress at all. So those are my 4 tips. I've said a lot about them now. I just want to share with you a new study came out from Canada. I'm sorry, not a new study, new guidelines came out from the Canadian Health Organization, and they have a new food guide. And are you ready for this? Here's what they said. Canada's food guide recommends, I don't know if you're ready, that we eat more plants and less meat. And then they have this chart that's like a plate, which is 50% fruits and vegetables, 50% protein foods, which would include things like beans and lentils, and 50% whole grains, and that you should drink water. Listen, none of this is rocket science. None of this is super groundbreaking, but I am so glad to see organizations, bureaucratic organizations like the Canadian Health, I don't even know who came out with this, the Canadian government in the newest version of their food guide, essentially the Canadian government, giving really common sense advice. It's not that sexy, and it's not that exciting, and it's not like keto where you're eating no carbs at all. This is like really, it's things that we've probably known deep down for a long time. And by following this process of getting clear, like, what's your end goal? Who am I listening to? What am I doing to figure out what actually works for me? And then focusing on your highest impact choices, you are going to be closer to this. This is exactly how our meal plans are built. Less meat, all whole grains, more fruits and vegetables. If you are following those, you're doing this kind of thing already. If you are even getting inspiration from those, you're doing this already. And if you are making 4 dinners a week and a lunch and a breakfast that all follow those guidelines, then what you eat when you go out to brunch on Saturday becomes a lot less important. So I hope I have shown you today some of the ways that you can feel more confident in making healthy choices for yourself and for your family, how you can stop the spin of wondering, like, who am I supposed to listen to and what is even healthy because it seems to be changing on a daily basis, and that you can really focus on the activities that are going to have the highest impact on yours and your family's health without making you crazy. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Even if this wasn't live, you can leave them later. And I'm going to link to that Canadian health story just so you can see some other experts confirming what I have already been telling you, and which I know a lot of you are brought into, which is whole, real, unprocessed foods are the way to go. Thanks so much for popping in today. I will share my write-up of this later in the week, and I hope you're having a good one. Take care.